Hey friends, today we're going to get started on our pottery project where we are going to be making a coil pot. We have our clay right here. You are going to get a brick of clay about this big. This one looks a lot more like dirt than a lot of the clay that I've used before. You can even see some of the speckles, but they kind of wipe away. And remember that once you make your pot and I put it in the kiln, it will be more white. It won't be this tan color. So don't worry about it being this weird tan color the rest of the time. So we have our clay. We have a fork. We have a wooden tool, and we have a cup. Now you're probably thinking, Miss Borders, why do we have those random things? I thought we were just making like snake things with our clay. But these are tools that are gonna help us make sure that our pot sticks together. Because sometimes when we just put clay pieces on top of each other, they don't actually stick very well. So we're going to be using our fork, and we're going to be making what's called slip in our cup so that we can kind of glue our clay pieces together. First, we want to break this down. And sometimes it's hard to grip and tear, so I can help you with my wire tool. It's called a wire tool because it's literally a wire that has handles on it, and it helps cut the clay. And I'm going to show you how. I'm going to take this, I'm going to pull it down, but it hurts my fingers, so I'm going to stand it up like this, hold the handles, and pull it, and it cut my clay in half. Okay, and I'm going to do that one more time so that I have a smaller piece of clay to work with. I'll hold my handles, pull it. There we go. And this is the piece that I'm going to start making into my coil. Any kind of clay you have, you want to kind of mess with it, smush it between your hands, get it nice and soft. And then this is the piece we're going to start making our first coil. And if you remember, the very first thing you're going to do is roll it between your hands, where your hands are going just up and down. And it makes a cylinder or a long round piece. Now this clay is different from Play-Doh, okay? So if you notice, you have bumps along your hands where you have bones in your hands, and you have texture on your palm. So when you do this, sometimes you get ridges in your clay where the bumps on your hands are. So this is just making it long enough so that we can start rolling it on the table. And if you notice, I have this under me, under where I'm working. This is a canvas cloth. It helps protect our table from the clay, but sometimes when we try to roll stuff out, it just messes this up. So I'm gonna keep my extra clay on here, but move it to the side and then start rolling. But if I'm sitting down, it's hard for me to press hard enough on this for it to really stretch out. So you may have to stand up in order to get the right pressure to roll this out a lot thinner and skinnier. And I'm gonna do that and be right back. So now that I'm done rolling these out, I'm going to bring back my canvas. So I want to very carefully pick these up. I'm going to hold them like this so that hopefully they don't break. Scoop my canvas back and very gently put them back down. Okay, so roll these on the table, but then when you're making your pot, put your canvas back so that it can protect the table as much as we can. And that keeps your clay from sticking to the smooth table. All right, so I have a little tiny bit of water, and I have my coils. Remember, we have to make the bottom of our coil first, and right here is getting a little bit dry, so I'm just gonna take my finger, dip it in my water, not a lot, just enough to cover my finger, And I'm just gonna rub it on there. And you can see it's kind of shiny, but it's not super duper wet. You don't want it to be too wet. So since that's wet and kind of sticky, I'm gonna use that end to start rolling. Remember, you tuck the end in and then start rolling it or coiling it into itself. And this is gonna make the bottom of our coil pot. And how big this is tells us how big our coil pot is going to be. All right. And I don't know if you can see, but I still have some cracks in here. So I'm gonna take a little bit of my water and rub it all around there. And if you have water that go in between the clay, sometimes that helps glue it together a little bit more too. It's not as effective if you don't score it first, but at least it helps. There's also this little bump here where the clay ends, and I'm gonna take some water and I'm gonna kind of scrape it with my fingernail and try to smooth it into the rest of the circle. So that there's still kind of a bump there, but it's not like a rough ending. It kind of blends in there as much as I can get it. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing to the back, just add a little bit of water to smooth out those cracks and add a little bit of moisture so it can make its own glue in there. And there we go. We have the bottom of our coil pot. I'm deciding to make mine a little bit smaller, but if you want a bigger coil pot, you are absolutely more than welcome to make it a little bit bigger. All right, so now it is time to make our coil pot taller. We're going to make the circles or the spiral that's going to make the sides of our pot to make it taller. And you can do that two different ways. You can make it with circles that you make and then stack on top of each other, or you can take your big long coil and just keep stacking it on top of itself until you run out. Either way, you're gonna have to kind of measure, and this is starting to get cracked, so again, I'm gonna just put a little bit of water on my finger, smooth it out, because as I'm touching it, my fingers are taking that water away from the clay, so it's just gonna get drier. So you don't want your clay to be like smushy, but try to keep it a little wet so it doesn't start drying before you're finished. I'm gonna take my coil and I'm going to measure it. I'm gonna lay it out, see how long it needs to be. And if I were gonna make a bunch of circles, I would pinch it off right there and make a circle. If I want to keep piling it on top of itself, I would see how long I could make it and decide if I want it to be taller or if I want it to be wider, because where you sit it on itself is gonna tell you whether it goes straight up and down, or if I set it on the very edge of itself, if I coil it wider, it's gonna make more like a bowl with the sides going out instead of up. So it would be out instead of up. But I can't just leave it there because it's not gonna stick. You see how easily that just came off? We wanna make sure that we like glue it down. And how you do that is by scoring and slipping. It might be easier to just use water for this. We're gonna find out together. But what I need to do, let's see. I'm going to show you how to do just a circle first. So I'm going to measure. I think that's about as long as I want to go. I'm gonna pinch it right there and tear it apart. I'm also gonna zoom in a little bit for you guys so you can see a little bit better. So I have this piece of clay that I know is going to make a circle, but I have these rough ends. So I'm gonna take my fork. I'm gonna try to make a rough surface on both sides. You're not trying to scrape a whole lot off, you just want it to be not smooth. And what it does is it makes all of these little places that are almost like fingers that will stick together once they're wet, and it won't come apart as easily. So since I have those all scraped up, again, taking my finger, dripping water onto it, and I'm gonna smush those fingers together and kind of smooth out the sides. I'm just kind of pinching it and then rubbing my finger over it, and it's almost like that edge disappeared. We went from having two different ends of the clay to having one full circle. And you see how my clay is starting to crack over there? Again, just dipping my finger and rubbing it all along there. So you scored and slipped your circle together, but we also have to score and slip our circle onto our base. So how we're gonna do that, take your fork, same kind of thing. You can either like tap it. You don't wanna mess up all of your hard work, but you can also hold it kind of sideways and just use the edge of the fork to kind of scratch it. However you want, as long as it's not smooth anymore. Okay, just on that very edge. And I'm gonna do the same thing to my new circle. Same thing, just taking my fork, kind of scratching it or poking it, as long as it's not smooth. All right, and I'm gonna take water. I'm gonna put it on the base. And on my circle, my coil, my level. And then I'm going to press them onto each other. Not pressing hard, just enough for those little fingers to combine, and that water will help them glue together so they won't come apart as easily. And there we go. We have our first layer of our coil pot. If I were going to do my spiral up, I would do the same thing, but it's a little bit harder because you have to score and glue it down, and then as you go to the next level, you keep doing it. So you can't just coil it up and leave it, because then it's not glued together. So it is a little bit easier to make these circles and stack them on top of each other, but if you want to do the spiral, I will show you how to do that too. So let's do that. We're going to start here, and I know that I want mine to be tall. I don't want it to be too wide. I'm gonna be careful with my coil so I don't break it. And I know that once I get there, once I get to that end, I'm gonna have to go up and around. So on the side, you're gonna see that little step up. So what I'm gonna try to do is you have to score this part, the whole thing. So taking that fork, scratching it around, okay? And you also wanna do your coil, but look how many cracks I have. It's getting super dry because it was sitting there waiting for me. So I have to wet it yet again to make sure it doesn't get too dry before I do what I need to do. All right. So when you get to the end of your coil, just like we did with our circle, you have to connect your spiral to the next level. So the spiral is almost harder because there's more steps you have to do as you go. It's almost easier to do the circles one at a time, but I am more than willing to help you figure out how to do the spiral if that's really the path you want to choose. And you still have all this extra clay. So my pot is about the size of the palm of my hand. It's not a super small pot. And it's only about maybe an inch tall so far. So I have plenty of clay if I wanted to make it much taller so that it could hold some pencils or that I could drink out of. It's totally up to you. You get to use this clay to make whatever kind of coil pot you want. And if you don't like seeing the ridges, once you put it together, you could smush the sides of your pot, you could smooth them out. It's up to you. I just want to see that you can make the coils, you can stack them up, and you can make a pot on your own. And let's get started.